afternoon, wherever you may be. My name's Susan Wingfield. I'm a Program Officer with the BRS Secretariat. I do apologise, I don't actually have a camera enabled on the computer I'm using. But in any case, the most important thing for you to see will be the presentation that I'll be going through. I'll go through it fairly quickly so we can allow maximum time for questions at the end, because things that seem very straightforward to us in the Secretariat might be a bit confusing for those coming from outside. So I shall get started. All right, so let's move. So this is an information session for for submitting pilot projects under the Plastic Waste Partnership. I'll just go through really two main areas of focus. Firstly, what is the Plastic Waste Partnership and what is its area of work? And then secondly, what is the pilot project program, which is really what we're here to learn about today. So the partnership was established in 2019. It's important to know that the Basel Convention, under which the partnership sits, is a global multilateral environmental agreement on waste. Now, under the Basel Convention in 2019, there were several actions taken with respect to plastic waste. One such action was actually to introduce globally binding amendments to the convention with respect to plastic. And to complement these regulations, the Plastic Waste Partnership was established, and this provides a means for interested parties to get involved in really shaping the discourse in terms of policy development in relation to the convention, but also there's quite a body of work ongoing, which I'll come to in a moment, and that benefits from the involvement of a wide diversity of stakeholders. So not just governments or parties to the conventions, but also governmental, non-governmental organizations, industry, and so forth. Now, the goal of the partnership is quite broad. It's to promote the environmentally sound management of plastic waste at the global and regional and national levels. And I think we can all agree that we're all aiming for the same thing, so that we, in effect, reduce the amount of plastic waste pollution. Just before I move on, a special thanks to our donors who have very actively supported both the partnership and the pilot project program. Those donors are listed on the slide, so thank you very much to them. Here we go. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's a body of work ongoing under the partnership. This focuses on four main areas, and really you could look at the first couple of areas as being the steps of the waste management hierarchy, namely, you know, what we aspire to the most in terms of plastic waste management or any waste management is its prevention and minimization, then coming down to ensuring its proper recycling, recovery, and so forth. A third area is transboundary movements of plastic, which is very topical as we, for those of you who know the convention, those legally binding provisions under the convention do relate to transboundary movements of plastic waste or the trade in plastic waste. So that has now been more tightly controlled, and this particular project group is looking into the impacts of these amendments and so forth. So quite topical for many. Lastly, there's a sort of overarching outreach, education, and awareness raising group. So what's important to know for anyone who is looking to submit a pilot project proposal under the program is that the project groups are quite important in terms of subject matter. They have work plans which are available on the website of the convention. Now, really, it's important that at the moment, I guess you could say the work plans are quite broad, and it's very much baseline gathering exercises that the project groups are undertaking, but as someone who is developing a project under the pilot project program, it'll be important to ensure that your proposal is linked in some way to the work of these project groups. That shouldn't be too difficult given the breadth of their work at the moment. It's expected they will focus more in the coming years, but at the moment it is a very broad work program. So if you're interested in submitting a proposal, you should in effect find a hook for that proposal without too much difficulty. So I think I've really just explained this, that the link of it's important that you find within the work plans some sort of linkage with what you plan to do under your pilot projects. But here it's important that you look on the website again, and you'll be able to see a list of possible pilot project topics that's been developed by the partnership. This is just as an example to help potential proponents or implementing partners. Okay, so we'll get straight on to the actual submission of pilot project proposals, which is what you'll be preparing to do right now. So the deadline, the second call for proposals, this is the second round. The first round, just to give you some details, was initiated late in 2020, and under that particular round of or call for proposals, there were 23 projects that were selected and have been funded. So there's quite a good success rate. Well, although having said that, we did receive just under 200 applications. But what we found was that many were immediately disqualified because all of the pieces of the application weren't correctly filled, and that's why we're really trying to take steps to reach out to as many pilot project proponents as we can to make sure those requirements are very clear, because it is a shame when projects are disqualified just because of a piece of administration in effect. So coming back to this round, the deadline is the 11th of April. What we're looking at, different from the first round, where we'll be accepting both national level projects and regional projects. And the size of the projects has also been increased. So we're looking at, for national projects, 50 to 180,000 US dollars. And then for regional projects involving 2 or more countries within a region, that's 300 to 500,000 US dollars. We've also lengthened the time period for implementation. So for national, we're looking at 12 to 24 months, and then a longer period for those regional projects, up to 24 months from 18. Now, something that is important to know is that we can only engage in an administrative sense with one partner. That from an administrative point of view, it only makes sense to engage with one partner. And this means in terms of concluding a legal agreement for transfer of funds. So it's important in that implementing partner part of your section of your application form that only one partner is listed. May be different from the proponent, the person submitting the project, but there should just be that one partner, and that is who we will legally engage with. Having said that, you can have multiple project partners, and you'll see there's a section under the application form where you can indicate other partners from other stakeholder groups. We also welcome any projects whereby there is some sort of in-kind or financial, co-financing that can considerably strengthen an application that has been submitted. Next up, eligibility. So this is quite important, and I think it takes a while for those not familiar with the conventions to wrap their heads around. So first of all, who can submit proposals? So we're looking at parties to the Basel Convention. So that is parties meaning governments, so those who have ratified the convention. We also have a network of Basel and Stockholm Convention regional coordinating centres. There's 22 such centres. They can submit proposals. For example, it may be a good idea to go through your region's regional centre if you're looking at developing a regional proposal. That's really one of the roles of Basel Convention and Stockholm Convention regional centres. If you haven't heard from them, or heard of them, I encourage you to look on the website to familiarise yourself with their location and role. Next is not-for-profit entities. So and it's very important that these not-for-profit entities must have observer status under the convention. So when we say not-for-profit, I think that's a fairly globally understood concept. In terms of observer status, that may not be so clear to those wishing to submit. This simply means that anyone who wants to be a proponent of a pilot project must have filled out a form that is available on the website, and there are some links provided at the end of this presentation to apply for observer status under the convention. And this means that actually once you're admitted as an observer, it really confirms that you are engaged in work that is relevant to the convention. It would make you eligible to attend meetings of the convention, and really that's a crucial criteria to have met in order to apply for this pilot project program. Next, I mentioned governments that have ratified the convention, but also governments that have not ratified the convention. Not that there are many, but they're still equally able to apply for the program as long as they have observer status under the convention, so similar to not-for-profit entities. Very important to note is that projects are to be to the benefit of developing country parties or parties with economies in transition. Now, this also may be subject to donor requirements. For example, some of our donors link or limit those who can be awarded funding to the ODA DAC list. Some are broader in terms of those who can be eligible for funding. So we really try to match the projects with the donors' preferences. But that's just a note that that's something more we need to consider. Ivana, I'll come to your question in a moment. I'll just finish this slide. Just in terms of another requirement, it's important to note that proposals must be accompanied by either a letter of endorsement or a letter of support from the focal point of the party where the project is to be implemented. So this is a step that can actually take some time, and we really urge you to contact focal points as early as possible, because unfortunately this is a step that actually disqualified many candidates in the last round, just that there wasn't enough time for them to get the required letters of support. This is another reason why we actually extended the application period this time to facilitate contact with the focal points. Ivana, did you want to come in and ask your question? I take it it's in relation to this slide. Please go ahead.
Yes, sorry for interrupting. And
No
just
problem.
before I forget the question, with regard to the requirement of donors specifications, should we only, if we have the country in mind, should we only contact you and discuss that, or is it somewhere listed?
Well, you can search for, well, that's the thing. You won't necessarily know upfront what the donor requirements or specifications may be, but I do. If you have questions about, which countries to apply on behalf of, for example, I do urge you to contact us, because we might be able to, give some indication whether they would be eligible in terms of the general program, I think it's a good idea always to take those steps prior to submission.
Okay, then. Thank you.
Okay. Right. So next we go to the process. Well, I've really already outlined this briefly. The call was issued on the 11th of January, and we have that deadline of 11th of April. It's very important for you to ensure these steps listed on the slide I've already referred to, you know, making sure that your proposal is relevant to the partnership in general and to the project groups. Ensure that you meet those eligibility requirements. For example, you're applying on behalf of a party, you're a not-for-profit entity, you have observer status, and so forth. Very important is to ensure the proposal template is used and accompanied by that letter of support. And if needed, a due diligence form that applies to not-for-profit entities. Unfortunately, at this stage, we only accept proposals that are in English. This is something that the partnership really would like to broaden, to be more inclusive of different regions. But at the moment, there's just not the financial capacity to ensure translations and to translate everything that we receive. So for the time being, we're operating in English only. Before I move to the next slide, I see Mustafa, you have your hand raised. Would you like to?
Yes. How are you, Susan? Thank you very much.
Very well. Thank
Yes,
you.
how are
Nice to
you?
hear from you. Yes.
Yeah. For the last slide, previous slide, you mentioned that the letter must be signed by the focal point.
Correct.
We always sometimes get difficulties in getting this, although the Minister of Environment should sign this letter. And we submit before the signature of the minister, but they don't accept it, which is very difficult for the focal point to sign a letter without the approval from the minister. So this is why sometimes we get obstacles or get difficulties. And instead of getting the acceptance from directly from the focal point, we must forward all this document to the minister, and then the final decision will be for the minister, not the focal point. So what's the problem? What is the solution? How can we solve this problem together? Thank you.
Yes, that's a tricky situation, and it's an example of you know, some of the difficulties that have been faced for some countries in the last round. You know, the focal point just wasn't responsive, or that a focal point hadn't been appointed. These issues were raised with the steering group of the pilot projects under the partnership, and they still view that this focal point endorsement or support is very important, and they didn't want to waive that requirement, unfortunately. But as I said, we've extended the application period. If there are great difficulties in getting a response from the focal point, we were able to assist in some cases during the first round. If you contact us early enough, we can try and facilitate some sort of contact with focal points, because we know for some entities that has proven difficult. So really, Mustafa, it's a bit of a unique situation in Egypt, but I urge you, if we can somehow be a conduit, please do contact me, and I'll see what I can do. But unfortunately, that requirement still stands.
Yeah, okay, but I'm not talking about Egypt itself. I'm
Okay.
talking about the area in
Mm.
North Africa and West Asia. Because last time we been tried to get the focal point approval, but in some countries we get the approval comes from the ministry, and once we submit all these letters, it didn't accept it, which makes a very difficulties or very making a problem with those countries when we're talking about the importance of focal point instead the Minister of Environment. This is a point. Thank you.
Yes, no, well noted. Thank you. Okay, I'll move on. Okay, so once we have received all of the submissions from the different applicants, just to go briefly through what is the selection process. So I just mentioned a steering group, and the steering group is instrumental in selection of the proposals. So basically, once the documents are received by the Secretariat, we will do an initial sort of eligibility and screening criteria and a draft assessment. And this will then go to the steering group for the pilot project program to select the proposals that will be awarded funding. Now, the steering group, you should know, is comprised of the two co-chairs of the partnership and also the co-chairs of all of the project groups. So there's a good breadth of regional representation and stakeholder representation on that steering group. Also important to note that it's not possible for anyone who is actively involved in the selection of projects to submit their own project. And that's just something, of course, that for fairness and transparency purposes, that is not permitted under the program. So I've already mentioned that there's that screening step. Then the steering group really looks at what the Secretariat has prepared and consults with the various project groups, and then develops this list of proposals. In some cases, all proposals will be able to be funded. It depends on the length of the list, essentially, that the steering group deems eligible for funding. If there's more projects on the list than there is funding, the prioritization of those projects then becomes very important. And that is also done by the steering group. Coming to the implementation of projects, and just to add, all of this is outlined in the modalities document that was linked in to the call for proposals and is also linked in, you'll see at the end of this presentation. But basically, once the steering group has completed their job, the Secretariat then advises the broader partnership participants or members and all of the project proponents of the results of the selection process. Then there is a step taken with those successful proponents to look at making any needed modifications to proposals. For example, if the steering group has made any recommendations for specific amendments, we take care of those. And then we start the steps to enter into a legal instrument with the successful implementing partners. Now, this can take a number of months because it does involve a lot of toing and froing with the implementing partners, but we're trying to streamline this process as much as we can. Then once the legal agreement is signed, there's generally 75% of the funding is transferred upfront to the implementing partner, and implementation commences. And over that period, the Secretariat will monitor and oversee the implementation, of course, together with the implementing partner. And then once the project is finalized, all the reports related to the project have been submitted and agreed upon, then the final 25% of the award is paid. This is just to note that there is an evaluation process that takes place, looking at all of the different projects and whether they've achieved the objectives that they set out to achieve, and how best to disseminate the results of the different pilots, because this is really a very valuable collection of information that can be shared amongst partners and also can be replicated. So that is a very important last step there. So here we've listed the checklist just so it's very clear that the steps that you need to take at the time of submission of your proposal. I really urge you to just double check and check again against this list. Again, if in doubt, please email me or my colleague Melissa. you'll see the contact details shortly. I also took the liberty of including all the links to the different documents, and you'll receive this PowerPoint and you'll be able to click on the different links once received. So this is a very useful repository of information. Lastly, there are the two email addresses I referred to. Any questions, any doubts, any need for assistance, please contact either myself, I'm the top email there, Susan Wingfield, or my colleague Melissa. So I'll leave it there. I'm sure there are numerous questions. Please don't hesitate to raise your hands. I think there's something in the chat. Okay. All right, let me just go through the chat quickly. Sorry to those who can hear but can't speak. Okay, just one moment. A recording will be made available. That's fine. So you can certainly come back and listen to this presentation once again. Also to note, there will be another such presentation on Thursday afternoon, although depending on your time zone, it may or may not be convenient for you. But we will have both the links to the recording and to the PowerPoint on our website. Okay. Leslie, can you see any chat questions? Oh, I see. Is that Pete? Did you have your hand raised?
Yes, thank you very much.
Please go ahead.
I would like to ask from your experience, how lengthy is the process of becoming an observer while being an NGO? Would it fit the time frame which is left for submitting the project?
Absolutely. I think, it can take a few weeks, but don't let that stop you. In short, please apply for observer status as soon as possible. But if we know that your application has been submitted before you submit the final project proposal, we really try to make sure that we deal with your observer application, and then that means that we can accept the proposal. So, but I do urge you to do that as soon as possible.
Thank you very much.
In short, there's still plenty of time, so don't worry about that.
Thank you so much.
Annabelle, we will be making a copy of the presentation available. Leslie, can you confirm at the end, there's an option at the end of the webinar to download the presentation, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I will
Brilliant.
be uploading it shortly.
Great. Okay, so just looking a bit more, I'm still trying to keep my eye on the chat here. Haven't seen, Pete, did you have another question, or that's an old hand?
That's an old hand. allow
Okay.
me to delete it.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so just while I'm waiting for further questions, in terms of our last round, the things that we found quite prevalent and were the main reasons that proposals unfortunately were rejected were, if proponents hadn't gone through the step of becoming observers to the convention, and this is a really simple thing to do. So that's why we're really trying to make sure that everybody understands that it's a very important step to take. Firstly, another issue, of course, were the focal point letters. But again, if you're not getting any response from your focal point, and actually that's something I can clarify at this point, if you're new to the convention and you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of focal points, although there is a link provided in the application documentation, you essentially go to the Basel Convention website and look under partners, and you can see all the different country contacts, and they're divided into the types of contacts. And you need to be looking to get an endorsement or support letter from the focal point of the country for which the project applies. So if you have any difficulties understanding that requirement, do get in touch, but it is an important step as well. Mustafa, I see you've got another question or
Yes,
comment.
yes. I will ask about if the focal point changed and it's not modified in the list at your site. What can we do here? Because sometimes
Mhm.
the Minister of Environment was cancelled in some countries, so it changed it to the higher council. It's not a minister. So the
Yes.
higher council is responsible about the convention. So here the focal point will be the high council, not a focal point. So how can we do this situation? Because, for example, Sudan, for example, Iraq, and some other countries, so it needs the higher level will be signed the letter instead of focal point listed in your site. So please, if you are modified your focal point site for North Africa and West Asia, please tell me if we can go through this site or we can directly go through the focal point directly online. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. Well, just to clarify that we update the contact points, focal points, and so forth in response to requests by the countries concerned. So even if we hear that Sudan has a new focal point, until they officially advise us of that, we can't change that listing. Now, something that might help in this situation, it sounds very frustrating if, for example, you, as you said, you can get a higher office than the focal point to endorse the project, but we need the focal point's endorsement. You can also go through the permanent mission in Geneva. Now they can confirm focal points, they can confirm that certain endorsements can be accepted. So there is that other avenue that I urge you to look into. It's just from the Secretariat standpoint, it's very difficult to, determine, okay, well, this entity is higher than that entity and therefore their word should be taken over. This is why the focal point system exists. But the permanent mission is also another conduit through which we can receive information. So I urge you to contact them as well. Okay, let's see. Okay, I see here, is it necessary to have a letter of support from focal point from each state in a regional project? Yes, it will be. It will be, and that's an important question because really the letter of support confirms that that the project country wants to participate and is willing to have you conduct the project on its behalf. So that is an important step. Okay, next up we are an NGO from Côte d'Ivoire. We are aiming to bring more awareness to local communities on climate change impacts and help them to be more resilient. Climate change is real and we must act for ourselves. Okay, so it sounds like there's a very interesting link in the chat. Thank you very much from Côte d'Ivoire. We hope to receive a project proposal from you that would relate, for example, as you've got here, to selection or sorting of waste, recycling. Of course, climate change is directly relevant to the plastics issue. You'd have to make a more direct link than just sort of more broadly speaking of climate change. It really has to tie into the plastics agenda. But thank you very much for sharing that video. I see, oh, Melissa, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, hi, Susan. If there are no more questions, I'd like to point out a few elements, but please tackle the questions first.
Okay. When is the start of the project implementation? So we're talking about April for the deadline. We'd certainly aim to have most of the projects well, as many as we could, started by the end of 2022. Okay, next question, how does the Basel Convention link into environmental education for frontline communities? Well, as mentioned, you know, the outreach aspect and education, environmental education aspect is very relevant. So if you wanted to develop sort of a community-based education project, that can be very much linked into project Group 4 under the partnership. So that shouldn't be a problem. I urge you to look into the examples of pilot projects under project Group 4 and see what linkages you can make. But I think that is a fairly direct line there from what you would hope to do. Yes, and in terms of the webinar on Thursday, on February 10th, it will be the same information, although it will be given by a different person. In fact, I'll hand over to my colleague Melissa Lim, who's also with the Secretariat. She'll be hosting the webinar on Thursday. But Melissa mentioned there were some aspects she wished to highlight. So Melissa, please go ahead.
Thank you, Susan. I wanted to bring up some of the lessons learned from the first round of pilot projects. Besides all these important elements that Susan mentioned, you know, meeting the eligibility criteria, it's important to note that we receive many applications. So that means we have to screen in a very efficient manner many applications. So it's very important that you write the applications in a coherent and succinct way. You will see the application form is designed in that way, so the objectives are clear. You have what activities, and then what budget you intend to propose for these activities. The clearer the application is, and of course coherent, then the higher are your chances of the proposal of passing the screening stage. So because in that regard, I'd like to point out that when you look at the application form, there's also a number of criteria that we assess. And so it's important to pay attention to that. One of them, which has to do with this idea of having a coherent and succinct proposal, is being aligned with the project groups. So you'll be asked to indicate how many project groups or which project groups your project fit within. And in the past, we've seen some applications where there are many, the proponent ticks all 4 project groups that Susan has highlighted at the beginning of the presentation. And as a result, that means they have many activities for a relatively small budget, which puts into question the ability to really deliver impactful outcomes, right? If you intend to do everything under the sun with just 150,000, it's hard to convince the steering group that you'll be able to deliver all these outputs within such a short time on this budget. So I think these are important elements to think about, which will, of course, help us in the Secretariat in the screening process, the steering group in the assessment, but then, of course, increase the chances of a proposal making it through the selection process. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Those were really important points to clarify. We'll to June. I will put the link to the Thursday webinar in the chat shortly. I see there's a question from Vian. Can we have a letter of support from Focal Point within our country, most especially within our local government unit? It has to be the national focal point, Vian. And as I mentioned, if you go onto the Basel Convention website, you will find the specific focal point. You go under countries and then you'll see country contacts. And whichever country that you're looking to implement, you filter by that country and you will see the focal point. Unfortunately, we can't take it at a provincial or regional level. It has to be that national focal point. Okay, I'm still trying to see if there are any other questions. Okay. Not seeing any hands raised. Just wait a couple more minutes while I get that particular link for the upcoming webinar. Okay, so here is the link for, you'll be able to find via this link I've just put in the chat, you'll be able to find a recording of today's webinar or information session, and you'll also be able to find the link to Thursday's webinar. You wish to share that with colleagues. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions come up. I'll wait. Too soon. Okay, so Sally Beck, I see you put the question, how important is it to choose all 4 topics or just a few of them? Are there any preferences? Actually, that relates directly to what Melissa was explaining. It's better to be more focused if you can. You know, given the finite amount of funding, it may not be possible for you to really meaningfully tackle all 4 project or project group areas. So we really do encourage you to focus or hone in on 1 or 2. So for example, you might look at a sort of minimization project with an educational component. That would look at both project groups 1 and 4. Going beyond that, it may be difficult to justify, but that's a recommendation both from the steering group and from the Secretariat. Okay, Jason, I see you've got a question. Can we implement the project in a provincial local scale, covering 3 different modalities? You can certainly implement at the provincial local scale. I mean, this is a great level to implement and to ensure project impact. So we encourage that. You've got 3 different modalities: the education and awareness aspect, training, and technology development. Yeah, that should be fine. I don't see any issue with that. The first 2 aspects would really be linked very closely to project group 4. And then technology development, well, I guess it depends. Are you looking at technology to enhance recycling, to, you know, for alternatives? And that would link to one of the other project groups. So I don't see a problem with that type of a proposal. Is LEK, local ecological knowledge, as a methodology accepted for this call? Okay, well, I apologize. This is where I need to demonstrate my ignorance because I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to. Nathaniel, did you want to maybe take the floor and explain a bit more? You're available to do so. Well, Melissa, if you're aware of what Nathaniel is referring to, please don't hesitate to come in. The question is local ecological knowledge as a methodology accepted for this call? I mean, there's no specific project methodology that we require, so that in may respond to your question in a sort of broader sense. Okay, I'm not seeing any requests to take the floor. I see your audio is not working. Will there be preference for regional scale projects over national scale? I wouldn't say that there would be, no. I mean, I think the steering group wants to ensure that there's a balance of projects, of the different types of projects selected. Regional scale projects are, of course, attractive because of the breadth of countries that they can cover and the impact that they can have. But of course, you know, a very well-tailored national project can also be very appealing. So I'd say don't let this an assumption that one or the other would be more preferential or preferentially treated. They will be looked at on their merits, and that's important to remember. Okay. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions at this stage. I trust everyone has been able to download the PowerPoint. As mentioned, it'll also be made available in the chat. I mean, sorry, via the link that was provided in the chat. All right, so, okay, here we go. Oh, thank you, Nathaniel. So we have some explanation from Nathaniel, and it's nice to learn new things. LEK is a methodological approach where we use knowledge of local communities on plastic waste in the case. Okay, well, that's a vital piece of information if you're looking at you know, community-based projects. So I would say that's very useful in terms of inclusion in your methodology. NGO 350 from Cote d'Ivoire asking if there is a link to LEK. Nathaniel, if you could pop one in the chat, that would be very much appreciated. Okay, so I think with that, might wrap up this webinar. Thank you very much to everyone for joining. Now, please do remember that there's a second webinar on Thursday covering really substantively the same things, but there may be quite different questions raised. If you have the opportunity to attend, you're of course most welcome. Otherwise, we remain available. If you'd like to email us directly. I just saw that Leslie has emailed, can we obtain a copy of the PowerPoint? You should actually have a file transfer window available to you now where you can download the file from. If you don't, I suggest you visit that link that we provided above, and we'll make the slides and recording available via that link. That was the link that we provided in the chat. Okay, thank you very much to everyone, and wishing you a lovely rest of the day. Okay, great, Leslie. Glad you got the slides. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.